Good morning, all. Steve Parisi here with IBC Global. Hope your day is off to a fantastic start as usual. For today's podcast, we've got a special guest, someone that I've been working with for about a year and a half now or so. Though through our conversations, I feel like I've known him most of my life. A good friend, RAMZY Magali. RAMZY, how are you today?
Good morning, Steve. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Although first time on a podcast, but excited to go through the experience. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking time to be on this today. I know you've got a lot going on as usual, but I do appreciate it. So there's a lot I want to cover today with all things cash value life insurance. We'll touch on that. There's more I want to cover with you, particularly around real estate, business, some of the other conversations we've had. But just to kind of set the stage, provide a little bit of a background for everyone. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about you, just who you are, your background. You can share a little bit on your company, which you are very humble and say it's a small company. I'm like, no, it's a big company. But of course, it's all perspective. But if you want to share a little bit in yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you. Overall, I think it's always about your team to start off, and surrounding yourself with the right people is paramount in all aspects, business, social, spiritual, all aspects of life and realms. But Techmasters, that's our company there that I'm in the front here today, but we are an IT government contractor. So we support a lot of the government agencies, and we focus a lot on multiple areas. IT, I would probably call them three buckets just to make it simple. Information technology, I know there's subsectors to that. And then there's LMS, learning management systems. So think colleges, instructional design, curriculum, books, development, training, teachers, more of a college. That's the LMS aspect. And the last is PMO, project management office. So that's going to be non-IT. That's going to be your HR. That's going to be administrative, finance, logistics, analysis, all non-IT related. And that's what we do. We're out of Virginia, so we're very close to the nation's capital, just about maybe 45 minutes or so. And we support most of our employees are different sites. They're different government sites. So that's Techmasters in a quick, 60 seconds, 90-second pitch.
Definitely. Just a quick question. So how big is your company employee count? You're right around 150, correct?
Sure. Yeah, we're about just shy of that. I think we'll bypass that. We're on track to, I think we're about 135. I know it changes daily when we're adding, but we should be at the 150 mark. The pandemic, we did go through ups and downs, but we're back on a positive trajectory. But yeah, about 150 is a good assessment.
Nice work. And that's a lot of work. And I know over the years, or I should say the past year and a half, I've talked to you for advice several times just on growing a company, call it growing pains as you deal with internal issues and such. And you're experienced there. That's evident just from my personal conversations with you. But 130 to 150 employees, that's a lot. That's a lot of people to manage, and you've got a good structure in place.
Yeah, we're learning a lot. It's all about the journey. And I know we were just speaking prior to the podcast, and I always challenge people to have a defining word, and what word defines you. And it's a lot of questions. Who are you? What motivates you? Sometimes I will probe and ask other questions, like what were your happiest moments? What do you recall? What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite book? And I would just, it's fun to do that exercise because I like doing it myself. And so maybe 10, 15 questions I would ask, and we can kind of hone in and come to a word. But why I'm bringing that up is my word is progress. And progress is what makes me happy. It's what drives me. It's what helps me to come in the next day. And so I mention that because it's about the journey. So a negative is really an opportunity and a challenge to propose a different solution. So I actually always say I love to fail. That sounds weird when people say it, but I fail fast. I fail forward. I like to fail because now I know that didn't work, and I'm going to try the next thing and then try the next thing. It actually motivates me. But So we make a ton of mistakes. I make mistakes all day long.
I hear that from some of the most successful business owners and motivational speakers that I listen to. What you just said, they say that quite a bit. Well, thank you for sharing that. So let's segue in a little bit, because you've got a business background. You know your stuff just from my conversations with you. When did you first hear about whole life insurance? I know it was before you met us, but I kind of, where I'm going with this is first where you first heard about it, and then your numbers background or how you dig into it to that part as well. But let's start. Where did you first hear about it?
I think I had mentioned his name, but I think I'm an avid podcast listener, books listener, books on tape. I'm constantly trying to put a solid hour plus a day in learning. And that comes in a number of fashions. Physically reading books. I love business books. I love obviously listening to biographies and interviews of more successful people, podcasts, books on tape. So that's where a lot of my investment of time and knowledge. And so I came across what do the wealthy do? Yeah. And it piqued my interest. And I think I read a book or two about the Rockefeller. Yep. I forget the name, the Rockefeller Method or something to that effect. So I watched pretty much, then I went deep and looked at everything, and they were alluding to it took a long time to figure out what they were talking about. But at the end, they were talking about cash value and life insurance. They didn't come out and say it that way, but it took a lot of sifting through the sand to get these pieces of diamonds here. So eventually found out that they're talking about cash value life insurance. And I started now watching every video that I could find on cash value. And then I have this rule, just something to keep myself sane, is try to read 3 books on a topic before you reach out to a professional, because everyone's going to be biased, and we're all salespeople. I'm a salesperson, and they're generally going to do that. So what I did is I read 2 or 3 books on this, and I watched all these videos. And I'm a slow learner, believe it or not. And once I have repetition, I got a better understanding. I can't say I fully understand it, but that's how it got started.
Got it. No, thanks for sharing that. A lot of people go that path as well, where you mentioned starting with what do the Rockefellers do? What do the elite do? Ultra wealthy, and we hear of concepts that often attract us. Okay, what are the people with the money doing, and how can I copy that to the closest degree possible? Because my finances may be different than theirs, or likely are, but how do I copy it and continue to build my overall net worth? And to your point, often we see, those strategies or those concepts marketed, and it does lead to cash value life insurance. There's a lot of stuff out there, and I say that because I'm in the industry, so I see it all the time. But then as you started to dig into cash value life insurance, let me ask this. So what got you interested in the actual product? Because the concept, it sounds like it attracted you, but then step 2 was like, okay, this has to make sense. And what are some things, just as you reflect back, what you like and then what you didn't like about it too?
So this is there's a good and bad. Yeah. So what I know now, I may have acted differently 2 years ago, but that's because of progress again. And so we cannot reflect negatively on that just because you would do something differently that I would, where I was 2 years ago was I'm sitting on a pile of cash. What do I do with it? Now I'm in the opposite end of the spectrum. So at that moment, I said, it can't be, there has to be a way where you can actually have your money making money while you're looking for better opportunities. And so that was one of the goals. One of my objectives is to make sure to have a vehicle that retains the value and hopefully grows the value while being liquid and allowing me access to that versus truly comparing to a bank. Right. And sitting in a bank. And then so I started doing what we all do, which is what are the wealthy people doing and where are they putting their money? And And then I came across this opportunity, and that's where I investigated further.
Correct. Yeah. So on that point, so the cash value life insurance product, if I were to just kind of describe it, it is what it is. When it's properly set up with the larger mutual companies, you've got a safe, liquid, tax-free area to position money that over time, over the life of the policy, will produce a net internal rate of return. I emphasize IRR, not dividend rate, net internal rate of return of 3 to 5%. And then some of the drawbacks we can touch on too is, yes, that 3 to 5% it'll average out, but I've got the initial startup costs where no matter how well the product's designed, I've got a negative hit, I've got to overcome that. And those are important things to touch on. I've learned that more and more. I try and touch on them, but through our conversations, it's like whatever anyone's pain point or objective is, make sure that that is crystal clear and we continue to focus on it, because it's people's money that are going into the products. Yes, it's a nice vehicle, but then how do I maximize the vehicle? And then how do I use it? I can use it whatever my goals are, real estate, business, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm.
So that leads me to the next question. What I love, I speak in stories and anecdotes, but I don't know if you remember the discussion about salesmanship, and it was about a pen. And they asked an individual, it was an interview, I don't recall exactly, but they said, okay, here's this pen, sell me this pen. And they had a couple of people and they start selling the pen, and okay, well, it writes, it can have this longevity, it's got a roller, it's got a nice rubber cushion, and go into all the details about the pen, where it's manufactured, and at the end the lesson was, no, you have to at the end he says, I don't even use a pen, I use pencil, or I actually prefer to do everything electronically. So the point of the goal here that I'm trying to get at is, it all starts with, it depends. You have to ask questions. Yeah. So for this vehicle, it really depends. It depends on, where are you in your life? What are you trying to do? I have to go through another series of 10, 20 questions. Where's your risk tolerance? How old are you? What are you familiar with? What are you knowledgeable about? What is your geographical region? What do you see in the future? So you get my point. So yeah. I think the key is questions, and to assess that first. Where are you? And I don't think you have a silver bullet answer for everyone.
Correct. There's no such thing. Yeah, I wish there was, but there's not, because everyone's situation is different. Yeah, asking questions. I remember when we first connected, I remember the first time we engaged, actually, it was through the info email. I didn't know who you were. You didn't know who I was, because it's all through the info account, that you got an email and it was broken. The links didn't work. Something was off. And I saw it. I'm like, no, this can't be it. So sorry. I'll get that resolved ASAP. Here's the videos that actually work. And you responded back. I'm like, who is this guy? Because most people don't do that as far as add constructive criticism points before we even know them or before I engage with them. But then you had connected with one of our agents. He said that went well. And when we connected, I remember that the main focus at that point in time was, hey, I'm interested in this product. I've got money over here in cash, not doing a whole lot. What does this product look like? How do I maximize the cash benefit, internal rate of return? I remember studying that as we looked at funding a policy over 5 years, 10 years, just different scenarios with different companies. Call it information overload, which seemed like you had fun. I always have fun, going through that kind of stuff with everyone. But when we first connected, I do recall that it was a very, very laser-focused approach on, how do I get the most out of my money when I'm going to direct it in the cash value? And let's start by just thinking, okay, if I let it sit and grow, what will that look like? Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're dead on. I wanted my very, very infancy stage to make sure that this is a home for some cash. Yeah, and it definitely does provide that.
Yeah, definitely. Let's touch on another point, because the internal rate of return, which for anyone listening that isn't familiar with that term, that's the net growth rate after all of the insurance expenses, everything that comes with the actual life insurance product. Something that you've mentioned, and a lot of people have mentioned to me, and it drives me up the wall when I see it marketed improperly, is the idea of a life insurance policy that's earning a dividend rate, call it of 6%. You know where I'm going. And I have a loan rate of 5%. When you first saw that, before or after we connected, as a consumer, so not with industry experience, what goes through your mind when you see that?
So since you've mentioned it, there is a bit of, it's not crystal clear with all the videos. They just often focus. There was some point of confusion where I thought I was making, this idea that I can basically make the money. So this IRR, this dividend return. I know they're different, and I can actually go and now use that money, and I can make money on that. So I was like, wow, this is genius. But they really, and it could be me, but they gloss over or glaze over the fact that you actually have to borrow your money and pay an interest for your money, which is a difficult thing mentally to grasp. So I'm sitting here with my money. This money really doesn't break even till 5 years. And then now I have to pay to borrow my own money was a head scratcher for me.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail right on the head there, because it's not just you. That is a big, big point of concern, and call it frustration, where people feel like, hey, if I would have known that before the fact, before using the money, I would have done things differently, or I would have liked more clarity. Because typically what that sounds like is, hey, you can put money into a policy, you're earning a dividend of 6%, you continue to earn that on your entire cash value. If I've got $100,000 in there, I'm being credited that 6% dividend rate, and I can borrow against that $100K at 5% while I earn the 6% dividend on the full $100K. And that makes it sound like I'm earning 6% on 100 and I can borrow against it at 5. That gives me a 1% spread. Like, sign me up. And where I get annoyed, I'll say this, I'm in the industry, where I get annoyed with it is specifically, yes, you're earning a dividend of 6%, but that is not a true growth rate. The dividend is, again, a gross rate. The net IRR from that dividend of 6 might be 4, might be 4.5. It's not 5 what you're paying in interest.
You're actually losing money, and that was my biggest challenge. I think with all the calls, I honestly just almost, can you remove the column, the dividend column? Yeah. I just want to see the IRR, and that's why Steve keeps saying the IRR, because that's something I just kept. I don't really care if it says 12% on the dividend return. What's my IRR? Yeah, because that's what matters. That's really what matters. So that was another point. I think coming in to focus on the IRR coming in, I almost think is better than showing your dividend, because that was confusing a little bit to me, where I didn't fully understand it. And so that's where I think would help, just to explain just simple terms. IRR, look, you're basically, it costs, you got to borrow at 5%, and year one, you're going to be negative X percent. So you're actually losing money, and just hit that day one where you understand it. And now you really evaluate what's the best velocity for your capital.
Yeah. And I think what it is, one of the things you mentioned earlier, with everyone being in sales in one respect or another, is that's a negative aspect of the product. That some people might look at that and say, oh, that's not what I thought. I don't want to do it anymore. And I can say, if we rewind the clock 8 years ago, when I'm a baby in the industry, I would be extremely nervous to talk about that and potentially lose the conversation, let alone the sale. But just through experience, and it was from our conversations as well, like all of our content almost has the IRR, annual and average now. And that's a big reason why, from talking to you and others. But just from learning about business and such, transparency is so important. And when you show that stuff up front, show the objections, one, you're treating people how you want to be treated. But then the second thing is you prevent any type of heartache for the consumer and yourself down the road. Because if somebody feels like they got ripped off or sold something that just wasn't transparent, like that's not worth any amount of money from a sales aspect. It's not. Like the amount of stress that comes from that. You know what I mean?
Here the good or bad here is that what sets you apart from everyone else. And that is, you might trick some people and get away with it. But first off, the folks that do get it are just going to come back, and you're going to have to face the music anyway. So I would argue that, one, you're in a very select pool, and very, very, very select and small, unique, that you actually transparently share what the details are. And it should be, the focus shouldn't be to sell a policy, and I know that isn't for you, but it should be, is this in the best interest of my client, even if they're not a client? Is this in the best interest? Because it pays dividends. That's what's helped us in our business. We make our decisions. What is in the best interest of our prospective employee? What is in the best interest of our customer? And unfortunately, that is not common in this day and age. And I actually embrace that, because that's now, I leverage that to say, this is our differentiator. This is why Steve is better. I mean, I've had conversations where Steve said, you know what, I can help you even if it doesn't help me, even if you have to transition out of this policy or go to another policy or transition totally or lower your policy. But obviously, that's not financially beneficial to him. So that speaks to his integrity, and it speaks, of course, to that goal of take care of the customer. So unfortunately, that's not always the case. Actually, I would say it's rarely the case.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And I'm going to prevent myself from going into that in more detail. Let me ask you another question, kind of on the same topic as far as leveraging the policy. So when we leverage it, if it's a direct policy loan, often it's negative, but there are alternatives where it makes sense. So the cash value collateral loans. So what are some things you're looking at with respect to how you can actually use the money you've got in your policies now, as opposed to say, hey, originally it was a nice cash place where I could just take cash, move it over here. But now as your mindset has shifted over the past 2 years, more of an active investor, a lot in real estate, what are some things you're looking at specifically with policy use there?
Sure. So really at the end of the day, we're looking for a net positive between the cost of the capital and outside. So there's two ways that Steve has educated me on. You can borrow directly from the policy loan, or you can go through a third party, which possibly might be a little bit cheaper. So if they're charging you 4%, you might be able to get 3.5%, let's just say, from a third party individual or institution rather. So of course, we all want to go less, right? So we want to pay less. So the gamut is there. So as you become more sophisticated, or you have other avenues, it's just simple math. Do you have, where could you use your money? 2 years ago, I'm sitting at 0. So I'm like, wow, this is great. Well, yeah, on average, my return will break even. Maybe we'll start going into that to that 2.5, 3 plus. Well, yeah, that made a lot of business sense. But what I didn't take into consideration is, well, what about the first 5 years? What am I doing? So am I at a commission? So am I counting pennies and losing millions potentially by sitting on that capital for 5 years? It doesn't matter the amount, percentages are the same. So that's the key here is, do you have a better ROI on your money? So if I'm borrowing at 3.5% and have an opportunity to make something at 10%, of course that makes sense. So that's what I'm looking at now, is getting into more. And for me, that vehicle is real estate, but it could be anything. It could be business. It could be startups. It could be whatever you like. It could be the market, right? Obviously the market's down these days, but if you have a vehicle, bottom line, that gives you a higher return, then it's worth it. If you ask my opinion, I think you should be looking for at least a 3 to 5% gamut. For
Yeah.
me, if you're going to ask me my opinion, it's not worth it so if you're at 3.5, then you really need a 7% or higher.
Yeah.
And then now it's probably worth it to you because you got to pay that. You're borrowing your money at 3.5. Yes, it will maintain that IRR average, but so that's where I'm at today.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that and providing the detail. And that's one of the things too that I like to go into detail. And it's important to see it, like you mentioned, it's all numbers at the end of the day. So for example, if you've got, call it an opportunity, say it's real estate, call it just a 10% opportunity there. Hey, I've got this deal over here, I can get 10% on my money. So if I'm going to leverage money from my life insurance policy over here, say I go with the collateral route, which is 3%. Your case might be a little bit lower, the 275 rate, but call it 3%. Okay, so it's costing me 3% to access money I have in the cash value product. So how I look at that is if I'm you, specifically what I'd want to see are two things. I'm paying 3% this year, so I want to know what's the earnings rate this year, right? The annual IRR, but then also the average IRR. What's that look like? If it's not policy year 5, then I'm still negative in my entire bucket of money. So, and it's important to look at because the average, you can look at that and say, okay, this doesn't make as much sense because I'm behind the 8 ball. Specifically, I'm paying more in the cost to borrow than what I have earned cumulatively in the policy. And, right or wrong, good or bad, whatever it is, because this is a long-term asset, how people often view it. The thing is just make it transparent. One of the things, the first time I met with her, our mutual friend and contact, Elizabeth, who I think is like the ultimate when it comes to business and such, I've got a lot of respect for her. As she was putting me on trial, because this is our first call to make about cash value life insurance, as we went through it, just provided all the details, guarantees and such. She was asking a lot of pointed questions. And towards the end of that call, I said, if everything's done right, it kind of is what it is with respect to what the product will actually produce, what the loan rates will look like. Here's exactly how it works. Here's how people have used it. Banks that we work with use it. And it is what it is if everything's done, and just made it very, very transparent. And, you've got her at that, top-notch level, in my opinion. And she looked at it and says, okay, like that was it. And I guess call it the learning experience, because it's the same thing when I'm going through this with you, is just make it transparent. And then people can make the choice that is in their best interest, what they're most comfortable with. Like that's it. You don't have to try and sell them on something. Just make it clean. That's it. If that makes sense. I'm getting too wrapped up.
It does. And I think that's good. I love what you're doing because you're getting different perspectives. And we've had some poignant conversations, and it's amazing how comfortable you allowed me to feel where we were speaking as friends, even though it may not be something you might want to hear. And that's, again, another value. But yes, I think if you have all the scenarios, which you start off with questions, what are your goals? And I think the other thing I would say is I would add an additional question is, how about that first 5 years?
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to do that? Some people it's extra money, right? We have some common friends where, hey, this is extra money. I'm not going to do anything. Well, that makes sense. This is money that I don't want to put in the market because I don't want to deal with that volatility. That makes sense. So you have to almost give them answers to potential questions that they may not even know to ask, and then ask them as well. In my opinion, what I would do differently is ask, okay, in my instance, at the time, 2 years ago, I did not have an opportunity. I'm much more active now. So now I have more opportunities than I maybe will have capital. It's a good problem to have. And we'll solve it. But at that time, I had the opposite problem. I had more capital, less opportunity. Well, so if I know that I went through that in 2 years, possibly someone else may go through the same scenarios, to say, well, if that happens, you can borrow against it and it still makes sense. And you may already come to this bonus, but and we've addressed this with our accountants. We've changed accountants, but this is the other piece which made it a no-brainer. You've alluded to it, but never formally verified. In fact, the accountant came back and I misconstrued it because we were trying to see if it's now I can take that deduction, which of course makes it now a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Right. So now I can take that 3% and deduct it from my real estate transaction. And there was some stipulations if it wasn't third party that you couldn't do it, but you can do it if it's third party. Not giving tax advice, I would say obviously check with your accountant. But in my scenario, what I'm looking to do is I'm going to borrow that money, let's call it 3%, and then I'm going to use that as a deduction. That interest I'm actually going to deduct as an expense for that transaction. So basically that wipes out the 3%, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to take that. And so that's another bonus that you mentioned, and I still didn't understand it really. And you can of course use it for your business. And we weren't sure if you could use it for the real estate, and we got confirmation that we could, so now we're talking, now you're getting the deduction. So essentially wiping out that cost, you're getting that variance. And then on top of that, now your IRR goes. So you're almost double dipping at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the biggest, largest leverage velocity that you can have outside of the only other thing, which is crazy, and I know this is not the topic for it, is stock options, right?
Yeah.
Trading options. That's the only thing that's like a 10x leverage. But this kind of leverage is amazing for someone who needs the money, is interested in it, is active, even if you don't want to do real estate, but if you want to do business, if you use it for your own business, well, that makes sense again, because now you're investing in yourself. You would assume your returns are going to be higher, whether it's by equipment, hire employees, et cetera. So that was another nuance that I think going back, I would really go over, hey, what do you do the first 5 years? And by the way, if that occurs, this is what you could do, but check with your accountant.
Yeah.
Right. So now I'm like, okay, now I have these options, even if, and there could be some people will do nothing with it. And there's nothing wrong with that. So if you were asking me, those would be the two questions.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for sharing that. I guess the questions, I'll sum it up with awareness questions, asking questions for the person that they might not know to ask. I love it when people do that for me. Which on the policy return, because we get a lot of people that ask, hey, can I pump money into a policy and how soon can I borrow against it? 10 days to take money out? And my response is exactly this. You can, however, what you do want to be aware of in this case, you probably already know this from looking at the numbers we sent, but the worst part about a policy, no matter how well it's designed, is that first year. I put in, call it 10 grand, and I've got at best case $9,000 in cash value. So no matter how I slice that, whatever the dividend rate is, that's a negative 10% hit. So if you're going to borrow in that first year, what I do want to just build awareness on, look at it the same way I look at it, is I've got the negative 10% hit and the cost to borrow. So yes, you can do it. And a lot of people look at it and say, yeah, but long-term, you're absolutely right, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect. Long-term, you do recapture that. You see the earnings rate. But from an awareness perspective, mainly just wanted to mention that because some have been upset just when they find out after the fact, they crunch the numbers. Wait, this doesn't quite make sense. Like that's the main point. So that's one example of, call it building awareness there, which now we all the time will do that. And the marketing too with our videos, I'll point it out. Consumers, I'll express this, love it. Not all agents like it, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's like if the customer likes it, that's what's important, in my opinion. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You're providing a service to customers, not, I know you help other agents as well, but I just believe it really catches up to you, the golden rule. People know what's going on. It's just not, really, I recommend this book to everyone here. If you're in business, and wonderful way to grow your business is Raving Fans. And what that's about is just take care of your people. It's really the secret of pretty much all businesses. Take care of your employees, take care of your customers, do the right thing by them. they become a raving fan, right? Oh, let me introduce you to Steve. Oh, what I'm doing, right? Yeah, Steve is great. Why not? He's not paying me to do that. And if you're just looking at marketing, right? That's the best marketing. That's the best thing. When you go to a restaurant and why do we like Yelp? And it's others like us, and that tell us what they think. And so that's the best form of marketing. So you want raving fans as your customers, and that helps your business. But really, that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it to do the right thing and help them. And it's really, you're buying trust here. We are buying trust. And the good or bad is that this is a rare commodity to have these days. So if you can develop trust between your customers, more importantly, they naturally will come to you and bring other things. It just happens all the time in our business. We grow business by executing, and when you deliver, they come back and they want more, and maybe open other channels, network, other connections, introductions, other customers, other opportunities. So sorry, I talked a little bit there, but
yeah, all good, always valuable. So just to so thanks for the first part as far as answering questions or awareness questions, call it. The second part you mentioned, how you're using your policies, is really with the cash value collateral loans and the tax deduction. And I'll sum that up too, just because people, I feel, listening will say, how are you deducting that? Because loan interest on pure life insurance policy loans, the IRS does not like to see those deducted. They'll often question it. Yes, you can do it with a CPA and formal agreements, but you're treading a line there where you might get some letters from the IRS and nobody likes those. So the safe route to go is first always work with a CPA, like you said, no tax advice here. But if, for example, say I've got a long-term IRR of 4%, just to make it simple, I've got a cash value collateral loan, which is leveraging a policy with a bank at 3%. On the bank's paperwork, I check off, is this for personal or business use? If it's business use, there I go. I can generate a tax deduction there. So I can deduct that 3% while still earning the 4% tax-free if I don't mech it out. So that's where it can really be a nice home run, with the exception of the early years where I still have a negative IRR. That's, call it, the pain point. The worst part about a whole life product is the early years, if that makes sense.
and this is not a sales tactic, but I would actually say in many ways that should help you to have a more successful investment. Right. Mm-hmm. So let's just say you're -4, -5, whatever your chart says. So now you should be looking at 8% or higher to make sure. If it's 8, you want to look at 10. So it inevitably forces you to focus on better investments because it would make more sense.
Yeah.
So just shoot for 10, right? To be safe, your numbers are going to work. Shoot for 10 in your first 5 years, right? That's, if you want, just a sort of a rule of thumb.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. So let's segue just into a couple concluding questions here, which these are more about you and business, and I think you'll like these questions. So how old are you now? 45?
46.
46. Gotcha. Well, you still look like you're 35. So if you were to go back in time, because you've done well with business, you've grown your company to about 150 employees, and you've got a lot of other things going on too with your real estate business in particular. But if you were to go back in time to your younger self, or if you were to give a young guy or girl advice to say, okay, if I could do everything all over again, what would I do and what would I not do as far as trying to getting to where I am right now?
In general,
let's focus purely on Techmasters for the business owners listening.
Okay, so what I would do starting off in business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so right now you're at 150 employees, at about 135 to 150. So when did you start Techmasters?
Well, technically 2002, we got into an office 2007. So you can use 2007.
Gotcha. So if we were to go back to 2007, and the learning experiences from then to now,
Okay.
what would you do if you can sum it up in one thing, but it could be multiple, and then what would you not do?
Okay. What would I do? What would I not do? Okay. Well, it's almost the opposite. So number one, I've heard it a million times and I never heeded this advice, which is niche, 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 niche. You have to focus on one thing and focus on one area, one discipline, one sector, one customer, one product, one service offering. Really focus. And that is something I did not heed early on. And now we're heeding it more and more, but that probably would have catapulted us to a much higher level and gone through significant, we would probably be 600 people.
Can I ask a question on that? So I love that as far as focusing on your niche, play to your strengths. When you first started, so in 2007 through the early years, did you try and say yes to opportunities that came that may not have been your strength? You'd have to really research and take a lot of time, but you'd say yes because, hey, it's an opportunity. I'll do anything to continue to grow. Kind of that mindset?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, that is exactly it. It's the concept of coming to the grocery store and what do you sell? Shoelaces, apples, coffee mugs. We do it all, right? And it's just natural for most entrepreneurs, me included, to think it's better. It's a very difficult concept to really wrap your head around, that you actually will do much better with a very, very focused. Why? It's your vision is clear. Your focus is directed. Your customer understand what you offer, what you buy, your friends, your sphere of influence. In a nutshell, in 30 seconds or less, what do? It's clear from your name, from your website. And we always try to be cavalier and all encompassing. And that is something I would advise entrepreneurs starting out or still now. Just focus, really, really focus. And you can work out some other arrangements. So don't worry about the lost business. You can work out an arrangement where business comes to you and you work something else with other businesses where there's some type of cost or fee or some type of monetary gain to
whatever. Yeah.
Affiliate. It could be some type of an agreement or bonus or what have you, right?
Yeah.
Or sharing. So there's other ways you can actually work to benefit from those opportunities and capitalize on that. But niche, 100%. That is what I would do differently.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. We recently started doing that, committing to it, I should say. That if I were to go back and not do one thing, that would be it as well. Or I should say do one thing. It's kind of the same question. Focus on what my niche is, get very, very good at it, and then you're the expert there. Like we sell cash value life insurance, like we're experts in whole life particular, and that's it. We used to be, I mean, I'm still guilty of this, call it a yes man. Yes, we can do annuities. Yes, we can do disability, all this other stuff that you want to help people out, but we ended up doing a disservice. You have to do all the extra research and such. You're not familiar with the product. I can't jump in the driver's seat and go 100 miles per hour because I don't do it every day with those products. So we just started saying no, and like this is our laser focus here. And then we started to really propel from a growth aspect too.
Yeah, or you could play on the movie Yes Man. You need to be the no man. Yeah. No is the power. You need to say no. You need to say this is. You don't have to be impolite about it, but this is not in our wheelhouse. I'll connect you with other people, and believe it or not, I could say I sincerely believe that you will be much more respected. And your advice, your recommendation is going to be well received if you point them in another direction, and you will be more successful. It also makes it easier for your team to know exactly what they're doing, right? Because it's repetition. Only focus on this type of customer. You know exactly, you know their objections. You've learned it. You sound better. So I can't say enough about that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It's very hard to grasp even now when I say no, there's still a part of me like it's a difficult thing to do.
That's why. Yeah, you want to help out. So that you kind of answered the same thing. What would you do? Focus on a niche. What would you not do? Anything you want to say there? My answer would be not focus on other things. But as far as what you would not do, would that be it or anything else?
Yeah, So I think there's always things, but the question of what not to do. I will say, yeah. So there is one thing that now which I would do differently is, and I thought we were doing the right thing by customizing solutions around individual employees.
Yeah.
And it has come to bite us that we were trying to be very understanding and say, okay, well, Steve, I understand you have a child that you have to take to work. So why don't you come in at 8:30? But everyone else comes in at 8. And then you have another person, I need to pick up I'm just using kids because that's just common. I need to pick up my daughter. So can I leave early? And so you get to leave at 4, and now everybody else is here till 6 or 5:30. So you get the point without giving so many variations, and it's not always about time, but it could be so many other things. And after all of the experience I've had, it has come that we are now the bad guy, that we're treating everyone differently, and it's unfair and it's discriminatory. And so now it's the same across the board, and it's back to almost saying no again, but we've essentially said no to certain flexibility to our team, because now it may appear, even though that was not the intention, that it was possibly, well, we are treating people differently, but everyone's scenario is different. But now that backfired to you're treating them differently in favor and you're discriminating against us. So now this is how we do it. And it's the same across the board because it has come to bite us, unfortunately.
Yeah, you have to do it that way. And it's hard because knowing you, I mean, giving everybody else leeway and always making a custom situation for each person, you're doing it because you're trying to help them. Like that's what it is, and just call it considerate, just from our conversations and getting to know you over time. But it does come back to bite you at times, and it's frustrating. I see a lot of business owners, and I've gone through this as well, get frustrated just when you grow a company. You want to do it to try and, hey, we're giving everyone jobs. It's very, very good for our customers, for our employees. And then things come back to bite you. Like, why am I even doing this? People get lost in the frustration and all the negativity around it. But as far as what you said, what would I not do? Call it special deals and such to different people. It's a lot to be said about that, because then you don't have to ever worry about it coming back to bite you, because it will. Everybody thinks they can outsmart the system. Like, you can't. It's going to come back.
Treat everyone, give everyone the same opportunity. And even though we were truly, the intention here was more of a family, and if someone comes back and say, okay, well, let's customize something for you, and everybody just shares what happened, even though it's technically confidential. And so that's a good lesson. So number one, start saying no. I guess that's the message here, is probably no to customers and niche, and don't accept things that are not in your wheelhouse. And you have to, it's got to be an even keel platform for if you have employees, for employees.
Hardest thing to do. It really is. Last question. Over the years, do you have a favorite failure that you've learned the most from? I can start if you want some time to think of it and kind of get the juices flowing.
Yeah, I have so many.
I've got a million of them. My favorite was definitely my biggest failure. This was, I think, in 2017, when I had a part-time assistant, a couple other people here were trying to grow. And we had an opportunity from a decent-sized company out in Denver, So flew out to meet them. They're interested in policies for the board members. And I did everything differently than I normally would. I took advice from people higher ups at the insurance companies. This is how we structure these plans. Here's what we typically do. And that consumers didn't care about. But I did everything differently, did not play to my strengths. Went in front of the board, completely bombed. There's these 6 board members and their chairman just looking at me like, who's this kid that you flew in here? Very embarrassing. So not only did I waste the money of flying out there and spending the money and time to go out there, they didn't move forward. They went with a competitor. But what I learned from that is go back to your strengths, talking about the niche focus. Stick to your fastball. Like if I just would have went in and done the normal thing, asking questions, listening, trying to understand what they were trying to accomplish. They wanted the maximum cash value products. They didn't care about the long-term death benefit. Like just focus on what the consumer wants. It may have gone differently. But I was a knucklehead and just made some stupid moves, bombed. It was embarrassing. And it was about, they're paying in about 150 per year. So, I mean, it was a decent size case that I did not get. That was definitely one of my bigger failures.
Well, I'm sure you've learned a lot to be focused on your strength. And I really enjoy, sounds weird to fail. I really do, because that just makes you feel alive and you can make some differences. But there's so many that I can't pinpoint one specific, but I'll give you the genre, which is generally the same, and that will apply to a lot of folks, and that is to not argue and try to debate with people, and that could be your customer. It's almost chess, not checkers, understanding for me that it's futile to try to change someone's mind. And so that's a big lesson that really applies to all aspects, but specifically for business. If you're speaking to someone, they share their opinion, customer, what have you, as opposed to me trying to explain, okay, I understand. Let's use the finance, because you could leave your money in the market. You can leave your money in a savings account, and I could show you how you can make 10% and leverage your cash value life insurance. And I could sit there and try to prove it to you. And at the end of the day, if your belief system is that's too high risk for me, and I realize that we're just wasting time. So it kind of comes back to the understanding what's important to everyone. So takeaway here is you cannot change people's belief system. The biggest lesson for me, and I can think of so many examples where I would sit there and try really hard to explain to a team member our position, or I might try to explain what the other person meant, or I might try to explain what the customer wanted. And it was really a waste of time, in my opinion. So knowing what I know now, you're almost more, there's a reason we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, as they say. So I would do more listening and just understanding, and truly try to be empathetic and sympathetic to the person, to the situation, and just provide a solution that works within their box, within their world.
Yeah.
And that's it. So yeah, I might tell you, man, I could show you how you could get so much return on your money. And yours is saying, I just don't want to lose money. Right. And so that's too big of a leap. I'm not saying it won't happen, but at that moment in time, what you're looking for is, I'm just looking for a safe haven to just hold my money.
Yeah.
And you got to listen. You just got to listen. And the same thing with employee issues. Someone comes in and their concern is, and I don't want to project my beliefs and my opinions onto others or to defend or explain. I'm not everyone's brother, father, son. And I think I would try that often. I would treat everybody like they're part of my family. And in many ways, that we are a family, but we have to respect everyone's belief system and not project our own. So basically, don't try to explain your position to everybody or defend another person's position. Just listen and try to be empathetic.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. I mean, my mind's flowing a mile a minute. Listening, you mentioned the finance field, like the arguments that pop up, pay off your debt and then save money versus keep your debt, save money now because you can earn a higher return and pay it off later. The debate that goes on there, and they try and force people to listen to them. Same thing.
Yep.
Whole life or the stock market. The financial advisors, insurance agents, buy term and invest the rest. They fight with each other instead of listening and just accommodating to what the individual wants. You have to prove that you're right. It's not about you, it's about them. But that was well said. Thank you, my friend. That was really good.
This so is educational for me, gets our brains working and just reevaluate our positions on everything. But this hopefully it is helpful to others as well.
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, I'm holding back. I could talk to you for another 2 hours about this kind of stuff. But that's all I had on the agenda today. I wanted to say thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to mention? I'm sorry, before I just abruptly end.
Mm-hmm. No. I think if anyone is interested, you have to look at all avenues and even share where it doesn't make sense. I think that's valuable, and it will probably ease the client to not just share the cherry on top, but to share what are the net. Here's almost I love almost when they do. When they have, think of it as a review. I love reviews that tell you, okay, true third-party reviews. Here are all the pros. Here are the cons. Challenge with salespeople is you only get the pros. You need the cons. That's what makes me different. I'm going to show you, here are the cons. Well, if you have a better rate of return, and depends on the size of the capital, possibly might not make sense for you, right? The other benefit, and nobody talks about it, but I think I mentioned it to you the other day, is the death. I mean, no one wants to talk about death, but I like to know that my wife is covered. And that's a very peaceful closure for me to know that. So you are buying something. You're buying insurance. You're buying a product of insurance, although we don't use it that way. It is a benefit, right? So that's why it's lowered. So explain it. Let's not say, oh, well, let's not look at that. So basically address the cons. Yeah. Yes, you are negative for the first 5 years. Yes, it may not make sense. You probably need a higher return. You are paying for something here. You are actually getting life insurance, right? Which is real. And it gives you a peace of mind. There is a product there. That is why you're paying less. And if you have an opportunity, you could borrow. And then based on your accountant, you can deduct it. So those are the reasons why it makes sense. However, it may not make sense, or it completely makes sense if you're not even going to leverage it, right? Because, hey, I'm just going to sit on this money in the bank. Okay, well, let's almost go through scenarios. And so all the pros, that's my takeaway for what I would like to see is, here are the pros, here are the cons. And ask me questions. Well, what are you looking to do? And even if you don't know, here's what could play out in the next 5 years for you.
Yeah.
That would be why I love working with you. I love your transparency. You know numbers better than anyone. This man loves Excel. He works on Excel for fun on his time off. So this, if you want to see the numbers, he has customized solutions and tell you everything. Just keep doing what you're doing. Pros and cons for all future clients, I think, would be beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I appreciate your time, just getting to know you over the years. And thank you for all listening. RAMZY, have a great day, and we will talk to you in the future.
Take care. Thank you for having me. Take care.
Thanks. Bye. Hey guys, Steve Parisi here. If you enjoyed the content you just saw, please subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell for future videos. If you'd like more information or to see some custom policies for yourself, feel free to call or email our offices at the contact information below.